Welcome to the Secrets of Personal Injury Law with Colin Bober.
Hello and welcome to the Secrets of Personal Injury Law with experienced attorney Colin Bober. Thank you so much for being here. And Colin, great to see you again.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about understanding damages in personal injury cases, kind of an exploration of the different types of damages that victims can claim, from medical expenses to emotional trauma, and of course, how they're calculated. So let's start here. What are the main types of damages that victims can claim in personal injuries cases? And if you could provide maybe some examples just to make it so we can understand it better, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So in legal terms, we talk about, you may hear the verbiage economic damages, which are the dollar figure of your medical bills and or lost wages. Something you can put a dollar figure on, that's what we consider economic damages that are pretty much easily calculated, versus general damages, which are your pain and suffering, mental anguish, loss of consortium, and things like that. That's all subjective. There is no perfect number with that. So it's hard to tell how much a client may get. If you add those two things together, you have to kind of argue it in terms of, as a business decision from an insurance carrier, how much is the insurance carrier willing to pay to convince the claimant to indemnify or release the person who caused the injury for the rest of their life. That's what happens when you sign a release. You take the money and that's it. Game over. You sign over all future claims all in one. So how much is that going to take? And that's really what the conversation should be, because that's the end goal. That's what they want from somebody who's a claimant.
How are they calculated? Like as far as when you have a personal injury claim, obviously you can, like you said, you can calculate medical bills, you can calculate damage to your car, what have you, but how's emotional trauma calculated?
After an accident, some of them are traumatic. Some people who have children in the car, that's a different conversation, because if you have somebody who's a 6-year-old, now this 6-year-old has nightmares and things like that with just keeping the parent up or having to deal with that, whether it's affecting their school day or maybe it's affecting an adult's work day, because we've had several clients that got hit by drunk drivers. And whether or not the impact was bad, having the knowledge that you got hit by a drunk driver is not going to sit well with you at night.
Yeah, it can mess with your head for sure.
So a lot of people will go through counseling, and that kind of goes a little bit on the economic side because there's a dollar figure there. But then when you get into negotiations with the insurance company, if you have to go through 6 months of therapy just to be as close to normal as you can get, because one of the things that we accept as personal injury attorneys is nobody's ever going to be 100% after an accident. They never are.
Right.
Even if you feel better, you're always going to remember it. It's something that you forever. And the unfortunate part about the law is the only way that you can be compensated is financially, right? And there's never enough money in the world to make you feel like you got enough, right? So that's the hard balance between what we do and, what we can actually deliver and what is, what's ambitious. Everybody wants as much money as possible, but the truth is that a lot of people only carry the minimum policy in Texas of $30,000. In a lot of cases, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And so when it comes to answer the question more directly in terms of general damages, the way we describe it, since it's a subjective number, is the more treatment you have to receive to feel as close to normal as possible, the easier it is to argue for pain and suffering, because you had to endure more to get back to as close to pre-accident condition as possible. Whereas if you go to physical therapy 4 times, and that's it. It's going to make it hard for me to explain to a jury that you deserve however many thousand in compensation for pain and suffering, because I don't have anything to show that. I don't have anything to show what you did to deserve it, because as a plaintiff, you have the obligation to prove your damages, every element. So what is it in the treatment process that you can give me as the attorney to get you what you want? If you don't do that, you're not going to get the result that you're seeking.
When it comes to documentation, what type of documentation is typically required for part of the claim?
So it depends on which side of the claim we're talking about. If we're talking about economic damages, then it's simply the medical bills. If it's general damages like pain and suffering, what we do sometimes is we tell the client, hey, it's not an exact science. There's not a perfect number on it. So what we encourage you to do is either do one of two things. Either maintain a journal that you kind of keep track of, hey, I'm having trouble sleeping, or I'm having trouble walking, or I have headaches, or I have radiating pain down one of my limbs. My dominant hand hurts, so I can't write. Things like that, because you're not going to know. And like we said in a previous podcast, in the moment, you feel fine. Like that's not what you're focused on at all, but you may feel it within a couple of days, and it may linger for a couple of weeks or months. So we tell them to kind of keep a journal so that you don't have to remember all that in the moment.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, same thing with lost wages. If you're missing work because you're going to treatment, then keep track of your lost wages, because for lost wages, you have to produce either tax returns or pay stubs. And so you have to collect that at the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to go dumpster diving at the end of the case trying to find it. And that's never easy. Who keeps their pay stubs? Everybody gets direct deposit, right? Yeah. As long as the claimant can remember the obligation as a plaintiff to prove everything, then it'll help people, document what they need to get the best compensation. Because without that, you're telling a jury, I need, $100,000, but you don't have anything to prove it.
So lost wages, you mentioned that. Obviously that's you can easily calculate lost wages by how much time you miss from work. But when it comes to future earning capacity, is that a little different? Because I don't know, is it a little more subjective?
A lot of people post-COVID, a lot of people are doing a lot of interesting things.
Sure.
Right? You have your Door Dashers, you have your Uber drivers, you got a bunch of different things. Everybody's trying to make ends meet. And the whole corporate 9 to 5 is kind of like a back burner thing now. They're able to produce their tax returns and say, hey, because of the doctor's recommendation or because of this injury, I had to take off, however much time off of work. So that's when we pull on the tax returns and say, okay, during the last 2 years, how much money have you made during this time period, and use that as an average. But if you have somebody on the reverse who's like, well, I missed out on potential contracts for, contractors or things like that. Well, that part is really subjective, because unless you actually had the contract agreed to and signed and missed out on it, it's subjective. You don't know whether you would have gotten it or not.
Yeah.
So you have to have something to show I had it and I lost it because of the injury. And that's where things get a little more difficult. So it's either we want you to keep track of your lost wages as you go, or start collecting your tax returns so we can show an average, because without that, there's no basis to argue.
Yeah, that's a really good point you brought up about the contract thing. Because that's how I work that way. So it'd be hard for me to say, hey, I would have made X amount of dollars next year, but they would have been like, well, how do you know that? How do you know what jobs, what gigs you would have had, what earning potential you have? So that's definitely a different animal. Or like you brought up the Uber driver example or DoorDash, like how you know how much you're going to make,
Exactly. So on those aspects, like I said, you can show an average, but if you're talking about lost profits, you can't prove lost profits unless you had the contract and lost it.
Yeah. So how about pain and suffering? You kind of touched on it a little bit before, but how is that specifically quantified? What factors influence the amount that's awarded?
There are a bunch of different treatment options that a client can have. If you have persistent headaches, then you might be referred to a neurologist who may discover that you have a concussion or a TBI. TBI is not a short-term thing. Or
what was it?
A traumatic brain injury.
Traumatic brain injury. Right. Yep.
So and that's why you need to identify after a couple of days what it is your pain is, or what's normal to you. Because you have young kids who bounce out of these crushed cars that look like crushed soda cans, and they're like, I'm good, right? Mm-hmm. But then you have some people who are like, I'm really messed up. So everybody's different, right? So no doctor can probe you the questions. You have to be able to say, this is normal for me, or this is not, right? So if you say, I've had persistent headaches and I have memory problems and it's affecting my job, then you're probably going to be referred to a neurologist to make sure you don't have a TBI. Mm-hmm. Or if you have a persistent neck and back pain caused by a protruding disc, where they may do an epidural steroid injection, where they inject a steroid into the area to decrease the inflammation, you go under anesthesia for that. That's not pleasant, and you're getting stabbed with a needle. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes that. So in those kind of things, or if you had a break, you have a break in your wrist or your hand, there's value in terms of whether it's your dominant hand or not. If you break your dominant hand that you write and do everything with, then that you need to be compensated for that because that's how you function versus your other hand where it's like a break is still a break, but it's not your dominant hand. And those are the things that we're looking at to make sure that we consider all the factors of what went on with you to be able to make the best argument for pain and suffering. And also, we also look into aggravating factors. Did the defendant hit you at a high rate of speed? Did the defendant hit you while they were under the influence of alcohol or drugs? Like those things will increase the value because a high impact will hurt you, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a whole bunch of different ways you can look at it. And we look at all of them to make sure that when that client signs on the dotted line, they're comfortable with the settlement because once they sign, it's over.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that's wild that depending on which hand you break can change the compensation.
Sure. Yep.
Huh. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yep.
Are there limits to the type of damages or the amounts of damages that can be claimed in Texas personal injury law?
You can claim as much in damages as you want. It's not really a question of how much you can claim. It's the reality of it is how much are you actually going to recover, right? So in Texas, a lot of people who file suit against a regular driver, meaning like not an 18-wheeler or a commercial vehicle, you're limited to whatever that coverage is. Right. Now you can sue the driver, but the insurance company is only responsible to pay unless they completely obliterate it and drop the ball completely. There is a way to get them to pay over the policy limit, but 95% of the time, you're limited to whatever that once they pay out their policy limit, they're done. So if you get a verdict if you file suit and get a verdict for, say there's a $30,000 policy and you sue and a jury gives you a, $150,000 verdict, once they pay out that 30, you got to go get the rest from the driver who, if they don't have any collectible assets because your house is exempt as a homestead and a couple other exemptions, you have a judgment, but you're never going to see the money.
Yeah. You can't. Yeah. If they don't have it, they can't give it to you.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
So you can file a judgment in a county, and cross your fingers and, but the reality of it is you're limited by the policy. And that's the thing is a lot of people don't carry underinsured motorist coverage, which helps you in these situations where the other driver is underinsured rather, and either they don't have it or they don't want to use it. And that's what it's there for. You can claim the world as long as you can prove it, but there are limitations on the actual recovery. So, and that's the difference. Like you'll see these 18-wheelers on TV with people swinging hammers at them and all that stuff. That's cool and all, but the difference is that if you get a judgment from a jury on a commercial policy, the company is the asset to collect, right? That's where it comes from. And those policies start between $500 and $1 million. So if you got the $3 million verdict, you got the policy and the company comes up with the other $2 million, that's where it comes from. But a regular person doesn't usually have the assets to actually collect the judgment. Yeah.
Not when it gets that high, especially.
Correct. So you have to rein in your expectations on who you got hit by and actually consider the fact that you should have enough coverage to protect yourself. Because a lot of people too, they have coverage, like they'll produce coverage at the scene to not get a ticket for a lack of insurance. But the truth is, we'll open the claim and they'll be like, yeah, there's a policy there, but they didn't pay the premium. So the policy is null and void. Okay, well, now what do you do? Right. So you have to think of it in the context of they have money, but I need some money on my policy to protect me in case they don't.
So the lesson is if you're going to get hit by a brand new Mercedes, not like a 1985, Honda Civic.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty much. And that's the disheartening part about all this attorney advertising is they're telling you that they're getting these clients hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they didn't tell you who the defendant was and how they got, right? And so if anybody has any questions about how much a regular driver has, they can look at their own policy and see how much insurance they carry,
because that's more the norm.
Yeah. That's more than norm. Most people say our insurance is too high. I don't want to pay it. I'm going to be legal and I'm going to make sure I pay the state minimum, but that's it.
Sure.
So then we get in an argument with some clients sometimes like, well, I can't believe this person only has $30,000 in coverage. Then you got to hit them with it and go, how much do you carry? Because if you only carry 30 and the roles were reversed, this other person would be in the same position you are.
Right. And I mean, I've been in situations where I had less money and I did the minimum because that's just all I could afford at the time.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's fair. But in terms of the actual recovery, it's usually limited by the amount of the policy, unless you get hit by an Uber driver that's actually a commercial policy, or a DoorDasher or an 18-wheeler or a rental that may have more coverage. Unless you get hit by one of those, you have to assume at the outset that that's a $30,000 policy, because the reality is if you look at your own and you only carry 30, the same thing happens to you.
Now, we talked a little bit about emotional distress and psychological trauma, and you talked about the journaling and all that. Like, what other types of evidence can help support these claims?
Sometimes it's similar to journaling, but sometimes we do a victim impact statement, which is very similar to journaling, except it's a statement directly from the claimant saying, this happened to me, this is everything that I've experienced. And very similar to, I've had trouble sleeping, I've had persistent headaches, I can't take care of my kids, whatever it is. Like, everybody's story is different. But the point is that you want to give the client an avenue to tell their own story, because when it comes to the insurance company, if you're trying to settle it without a lawsuit, you tell the adjuster, hey, if you don't give me what I'm asking you, then this is what my client is going to say at trial. So do you want to roll the dice, or do you just want to give me what I'm asking for? And usually that works to get it done, especially when there are aggravating factors like we previously talked about. So those are generally the ways. And then on top of that, of course, if it went to trial, you can call the doctors in to testify about, what they saw in terms of the injuries and things like that. But bringing in a doctor to testify is expensive.
Yeah.
And so you have to balance the client's interest, the chances of recovery, and the economic expense to get them where they want to be.
At what point would you say someone should go, I think I better call an attorney?
It's kind of up to them, because it's an interesting thing where there's one insurance company in particular that will do they call it first call settlements, right? So if you're one of those people who's not really injured, and they'll look at the severity of the impact and they'll say, look, we'll make you an offer of like $5,000 right now, and you can take the money and go. And if you're one of those people who's like, yeah, I'm sure I'm not really injured, I don't need an attorney, then you should take the offer as long as you're comfortable with it. Because what you can't do is reject the offer, go get an attorney, and then still not be able to prove any of your medical bills and damages. Because if you don't, now you've rejected that offer, it's off the table, and you may not get that much money back. And now you got to pay an attorney. So you really have to decide whether you need help with it, or whether you want to pursue an injury claim before you call an attorney, because the attorney has a duty to explain to you and set your expectations based on the information that you give them at the outset. So that's why we tell them, like, look, if you're only going to go to the chiropractor 4 times, your settlement's going to look like it. Okay, so if you want to go down this road, cool. Full disclosure, this is what it looks like. If you really need treatment, then these are your options. You decide and let me know.
It's sort of like what we see on TV and movies, right? Do you have a case?
Yeah. A lot of personal injury attorneys just want clients to sign and say, we'll get you as much as we can. Well, cool. But they don't tell them anything about the limitations on policy limits. They don't tell them, what the attorney fees are. Some attorneys raise their attorney fees up to like 45, 50% of the settlement. Well, that's not beneficial to the client. They don't tell them, they take their other insurance coverage fees if they can. So the point is, I want to make sure everybody knows what the questions are to ask an attorney when they sign up with them, or before, so that they make the right choice. But at the end of the day, a personal injury attorney is helping you because you're injured. Attorneys do not assist with clients that only want to get their car fixed. Why? Because nobody usually has the retainer to be able to pay an attorney, and these attorneys do it on contingency. But if I did a contingency on your property damage portion, you're still not going to have enough money to pay to get a new car. That's why it's not done. And a lot of people get frustrated with that, but that's the reality in the economics.
Right.
A lot of people can't afford an attorney. That's why we do it on contingency, but we can't take it out of your property damage. Otherwise you're going to be stuck.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So you have to decide what's important to you. And once you make that decision, then we can move forward.
Well, thank you very much for joining us here on the Secrets of Personal Injury Law with Colin Bober. To get in touch with Colin, visit boberlawfirm.com. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe and keep up with all things personal injury law in Texas. Colin, always great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.